Look at these images very carefully. Protesters on the streets of Tehran, the capital of Iran. You can see a group approaching a police kiosk. Some stop for a moment, look around, and then set it on fire. The flames start small, then spread quickly. Now pay close attention to what this crowd is doing. They are shouting death to the dictator, death to Khamenei. These slogans could land you in prison in Iran just days ago, but now thousands openly shout them in the streets. And these aren't the only images. Videos like these are coming from several cities in Iran. To date, 42 people have died in the protests and over 2,270 have been arrested. And what started because the cost of living skyrocketed has turned into just one thing. The supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, needs to fall. Things are quickly getting out of control, and many believe this could be the end of the regime. But what you're going to see in the next few minutes is even more impressive. Keep watching because we're going to explain every detail here. To understand how we got to this point, we need to go back a few weeks to December 28, 2025. This is the Grand Bazaar of Tehran, the great market of the Iranian capital. For 47 years since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, this place has been the heart of support for the regime. The merchants there helped overthrow the king and bring the religious leaders to power. But that day, something unprecedented happened. Hundreds of merchants began to close their shops. It wasn't a holiday, it wasn't a day off, it was a strike. A protest strike against the government they themselves had helped bring to power. And do you want to know what caused this? The Iranian economy had collapsed in a brutal way. The country's currency, the rial, plummeted to 1,450,000 rials per United States dollar. Imagine if everything you buy tripled in price overnight. Bread, milk, medicine, gasoline, everything unbearably expensive. The official inflation rate was at 42, but in reality it was much higher. Imagine being a shopkeeper who worked your whole life building your business, and suddenly you can't import products anymore, you can't pay your suppliers. You see your customers without any money to buy anything. Or imagine being a father who always managed to put food on the table and now doesn't even have money for bread. Desperation had overtaken Iran, then everything changed in an instant. The president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, gave an interview on national television in the middle of a speech about the energy crisis. He said something that fueled the fire and kept talking. "I'm sweating and want to take off my jacket." But according to the protocol, it didn't have to be this hot in here. Lowering the temperature by just 2 degrees would save a lot of energy. But we don't care. We consume and then criticize others. The ones consuming properly are you and me. There's no need to point fingers at anyone else. The president was blaming the Iranian people for the crisis. While millions were freezing in the winter without gas for heating, while people couldn't afford to buy food, he said it was their fault. That was the last straw. The protests erupted and spread at a frightening speed. Within days, demonstrations were reported in 111 cities and towns across Iran. It was no longer just Tehran. Now the entire country was rising up. This is when the part that truly terrified the regime began. The slogans changed. At first, people shouted about the economy, food prices, and the currency. But in just 48 hours, the chants changed to something that hadn't been heard openly in Iran for decades. Death to the dictator.
Death to the dictator. Death to the dictator. Death to the dictator.
Death to the dictator. Death to the dictator. People no longer wanted economic reforms, they wanted the end of the Islamic Republic. Protesters began burning symbols of the regime in the streets. The situation was escalating rapidly. The government sent security forces to suppress the violence. People started being beaten. Thousands were arrested. But the protests did not stop. They kept growing, spreading to smaller and smaller cities, even reaching rural areas. And then something nobody expected happened, something that completely changed the rules of the game. January 6th, 2026. The city of Abdanan on Iran's western border with Iraq, a small city with only 25,000 inhabitants. Videos start circulating on social media, and what these videos show is the nightmare of any authoritarian regime. Protesters marching through the streets, hundreds of them shouting slogans against the government. And there, on the side of the street, there are police officers, uniformed police officers. They should be stopping the protests, they should be arresting people, dispersing the crowd, but they're not doing any of that. They're applauding the protesters as they pass by, some even wave, showing their support. Have you considered the decision those police officers faced at that moment? They know they're being filmed. They know their families could face consequences. They know the regime might consider them traitors. They know that the Revolutionary Guards, the regime's elite military force, could come after them. But even so, they chose to stand with the people. They threw their weapons on the ground and refused to suppress the protests. Why? Probably because they also grew up in that city. They know the protesters personally. They've seen their neighbors, friends, maybe even family members suffering from the economic crisis. And when it came time to choose, they chose their people. This is the moment when any regime knows it's in mortal danger, when its own security forces refuse to defend it. There is no more regime, there is no more authority. Because of this, Abdanan became the first Iranian city to declare itself completely free from the control of the Islamic Republic. The protesters took control. There is no more central government there, and the situation only got worse for the regime. From there, a second city fell, Malakshah, also on the border with Iraq, a little north of Abdanan. In Malakshah, things got more intense. A large crowd stormed a government-owned commercial complex and caused significant damage to the building, but nothing was stolen. People broke things, destroyed them, but didn't take anything, because it wasn't about looting, it was about rejecting everything associated with the Islamic regime. And there's another crucial detail. Both of these cities have something in common. The majority of the population is Kurdish, and armed Kurdish groups started to get involved in the story. The Kurdistan Freedom Party, known by the acronym PAKA, released a statement saying that 4 of its fighters were killed and 8 were injured in clashes with Iranian forces while they were defending protesters who were being attacked. And according to the statement, they captured Iranian soldiers. If this is true, it means we're no longer just talking about civilian protests. We're talking about armed groups fighting directly against the Iranian regime on Iranian territory for the first time in decades. But the regime wasn't willing to give up without a fight, and what happened next shows just how far they're willing to go. Verified videos show security forces opening fire on protesters outside a hospital in Ilan province. A hospital, a place that should be neutral, protected. People were there protesting peacefully, and the security forces shot at them, leaving trails of smoke and fire as people ran for cover. So far, it is estimated that between 30 and 42 people have been killed in the protests. But the real number could be much higher. And what the government is doing with the bodies is absolutely sinister. According to reports coming out of Iran, when protesters are killed by the police, the bodies are taken by the authorities, and then the families are blackmailed. The officials say You only get the body back if you sign a document saying that the person who was killed was actually a member of the regime's Revolutionary Guards, and you have to agree to a private burial with no public funeral. If the family refuses, they don't return the body. Imagine losing someone you love who was just peacefully protesting in the streets, and then the government comes and says, "You can only bury your loved one if you lie about how they died, if you agree not to have a proper funeral, if you stay silent." That's the level of cruelty the regime is using. Now, do you really want to know why they do this? Well, because the funerals of dead protesters turn into new protests. When people see that the government has killed someone, the anger grows, and more people take to the streets. So the regime is trying to hide the dead, force families into silence, and break the cycle. And at that moment, something on the other side of the world made both the regime and the protesters even more tense.
I can't.
In early January 2026, American Special Forces, the famous Delta Force, carried out an operation in Venezuela and captured the president, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro was literally dragged out of his bunker in Caracas, put on a helicopter, and taken to the United States. For the Iranian protesters, this operation sent a powerful message. Authoritarian leaders are not untouchable. And for the Iranian regime, this confirmed all their worst fears about American intervention. And it was in this context that the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, finally broke his silence. His first public statement since the protests began. The message was clear and threatening, he said. What's important is that enemy mercenaries are behind the Bazaar merchants, inciting them and shouting slogans against Islam, Iran, and the Islamic Republic. Protesting is valid, but it's not the same as rioting. We are talking with the protesters. The officials should talk with them, but there is no reason to talk with the rioters. The rioters must be put in their place. In other words, Khamenei divided the protests into two groups. On one side, legitimate protesters, on the other, rioters who must be crushed. And do you know who decides who is what? The regime itself. In practice, that's like giving a blank check for the use of violence. The security forces got the message. They're using loudspeakers on the streets of several cities, broadcasting messages telling people to go home or face the consequences. The message is brutal. Go home or die. The regime is trying to terrorize the population back into silence, but it's not working. People keep going out into the streets in several cities. Protesters are burning posters and photos of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was killed by an American drone in 2020, and who was treated almost like a sacred martyr by the regime. Burning his image is a total rejection of everything the regime stands for. Watching this critical scenario, it's inevitable to wonder where this will end. Look, there are three possible scenarios. The first one is the regime managing to crush the protests with maximum violence, turning Western Iran into a military zone and maintaining control over Tehran, cutting off communications and using brutal force. The second is that the protests keep growing, workers from key sectors like oil go on strike, and the economy comes to a complete halt, and the political elite starts to split, leading to some kind of transition or a collapse of the regime. And finally, the country plunges into a civil war, especially in the Kurdish regions and other areas with ethnic minorities, where weapons are